delve right into this first keynote session, where the discussions will be built on the presentation made by the ACE. To moderate this session, I'd like to call up our moderator first, if you don't mind. He is the Executive Vice Chairman, OTL Africa Downstream Week. Please welcome Dr. Emeka Akabogu as he makes his way up here. Dr. Akabogu is a frontline commercial lawyer who is widely recognized for his expertise in the field of maritime law and policy in Nigeria. The Executive Director, Distribution Systems, Storage and Retailing Infrastructure at the NMDPRA, Mr. Obugo Ukoha, is also joining up this session. Please welcome him warmly. From Line Trail Trading Limited, please welcome Mr. Mustafa Fashiro, who is here, comfortably seated. Welcome him. Chemical engineer by training, spent several years in project engineering within the upstream oil and gas sector. Mr. Mustafa Fashiro, who is comfortably seated now. Joining up on this panel as well, we have from Emma Dev Energy Resources, Adebowale Olujimi. With a background in economics, he has been instrumental to the growth and trajectory of Emma Dev Energy. He's an accomplished business administrator. So let me welcome the next person on this panel, Dr. Joseph Tolorunshe. I saw him earlier. Please receive him. He's the legal advisor and secretary to the board at the Nigerian Midstream and Downstream Petroleum Regulatory Authority, NMDPRA. Over 30 years cognate experience, and he has a lot to share, passionate about ways to improve the industry.
I think we've had an excellent keynote presentation by the Authority Chief Executive, which has very excellently set the scene for this discussion. As much as possible, we'll try and ensure that this discussion doesn't last more than 30 minutes, so that we essentially extract the most important components of the discussion and have a talk around the implications and the application from an industry perspective. So I'd like to commence very quickly. Good enough, we have Mr. Ukoha here, who really, his desk job is regulating many operators who are in wet products and who are in distribution and retail. Now, in the course of the ACE's presentation, he made quite a bit of, he focused a bit on the regulations which are being developed by the authority and the application of these regulations within the context of the mandate of the authority. Now, the theme speaks to effective regulation. We know very well that over the years, one of the challenges which we've seen as an industry has been that a lot of issues relating to standards and relating to uniformity of expectations have not really been the way we want it. Could you give us some insight into what the authority is doing and what the authority's thoughts are generally with regard particularly to maintenance of standards relating to products and relating to service delivery?
Okay, thank you very much, Emeka. And first, I think I'd like to join earlier speakers to congratulate OTL for once again on the 17th occasion providing a platform such as this where profound industry ideas are ventilated annually. So I congratulate you.
Thank you.
Following up with the keynote speech by the Authority Chief Executive and the question you've asked, the authority has worked very hard to gazette about 16 regulations now, and we'll be rolling out about 6 more in the coming weeks. To sustain this effective regulation, I'd like to delve more, extend the regulatory process from just not regulation, but what follows it. And whilst these regulations speak to standards, safety, different segments of the value chain, what is critical in regulation is not these laws, is actually the compliance of it or the enforcement of it. That's what will result ultimately in the difference you see in the industry. And so it's a twofold appeal. On one hand, the authority is poised to make sure that standards are adhered to. The regulations are peer reviewed. It incorporates feedbacks from the industry as well. Speaks to all areas of safety and what the industry standard should be. But most critical, and it's something I would like to emphasize, is the compliance culture, not just within this industry, but nationally. It requires a lot of improvement. I was addressing an NMPC management retreat over the weekend, and I spoke to the cost of enforcement. The PIA requires us to begin to transition from the traditional policing role of the regulator to a business enabler. But we require operators to also support us in complying. When you enforce, for instance, a retail outlet is shut, the pressure is not just on the operator. All residents around there would have to travel further kilometers to, for instance, buy fuel. And each time we have to assert the role of the authority in that sense, it's always a bitter pill because it has both financial and operational costs. And so for the kind of investments Nigeria looks forward to attract, these are some of the signals that a potential investor, especially if it's a foreign direct investor, will be looking forward to. What is the regulatory certainty and what's the compliance culture? And so that is something I would like to recommend to every operator in this room today moving forward.
Okay, thank you very much. I mean, you've made some important points, and I'm particularly interested in your reference to the investors' confidence within the system. And it's in that context, I think, Mr. Fashinro, I'd like to ask you a question. And this is on, you're an operator in the markets, and you've actually traversed both downstream, midstream sectors, and to an extent upstream. What do you think, and what do you think really is the importance of investor confidence, particularly from the point of view of price certainty as it relates to investment against the backdrop of what the market is today? Could you just give us some perspective on that?
Thank you again for inviting me to this event. I would say really though, when you are dealing with regulation and pricing, what you really need is some level of transparency and accountability of the methodology that goes into pricing. If it's not clear, then what tends to happen is that everyone makes a price and everyone distorts the price. Everyone plays no one's as open to the realities, and you cannot really encourage other people to participate because you then start getting speculators in and out of an industry. And you have that really prevalent in the downstream at the moment. And then you then get people who are savvy at business practices that are not that straightforward, taking advantage of a situation where you see people building systems and processes in their businesses can't really compete. That's what it is what is the methodology of it. Take for instance, I'm not saying that, so when we look at the government today, I'm not saying, when you look at subsidy, for instance, that was being spoken about, when you look at removal of subsidy, and then you do not, and then you, for instance, you take where recently the VAT on diesel is removed. It's a cross subsidy of some sort, because what you're trying to do is you have a the new gas, what's that? The CNG promotion. You're trying to substitute CNG promotion because of gasoline. You've taken the subsidy of gasoline, of PMS, more or less, and you are just creating many imbalances in pricing.
Absolutely. Okay,
Yeah.
so the point I get you making really is that there needs to be a bit more consistency in the approach from a policy point of view to pricing, right?
Yes.
Now, okay, if we'll take that a bit forward, I'll come back to you on that. But a core part of that consistency, achieving that consistency, I'll speak to you, Dr. Tolorishe, relates to the licensing regimes which you have for the markets. The licensing regimes set out clearly for the operator what the expectations are and how he should go about that. And that also speaks to the point which was made by Mr. Ukwaha about compliance of the markets. So from a licensing point of view, it's been suggested by operators sometimes that there seem to be a bit too many hurdles to satisfy. Could you just give us some insights into what needs to be done and how, from a licensing point of view as a regulator, we can ensure that the confidence of the investors are met and that there is effective compliance on the part of the market?
Thank you very much, the moderator. Licensing and permit is one of the mechanisms for regulation and enforcement of regulatory activities. If you see our industry today, you can hardly do anything except you are permitted to do it. You know, to that extent, licenses is required. License is one of the instruments with which enable you. But it's very important that the licensing regime should be very clear. The procedure for obtaining this license should also be very clear. It should be publicized, either on a website or even gazetted if possible, so that the investors will not start calling you. Oh, what can I do? I need a license for this. How do I go about it? So that is why it's very important that the licensing regime, the procedure for obtaining it, and even the processes for award of this license should be very clear and not make too rigorous and tedious for investors to come in. So that's why you find in most of the regulations we have made, the licenses that are provided there are very clear. You can see there, whatever activity you want to do, just get a hold of our regulations, you will see those licenses. So, peradventure, you have any problem regarding the license, the offices are open. During office hours, you can walk in and you can be given clarity, you can be given direction of how to obtain these licenses. Another thing we really need to know about this compliance issue is that the investors should understand that the regulator needs to monitor this compliance. You know, we need to monitor it to ensure that the investor is also complying with the rules and regulations. But the regulator's the regulation function is to guide the investors. I know a businessman does not want to be regulated. No businessman wants to be regulated. But however, we'll find out that if the regulator's role is just meant to give an oversight and to give you direction of what to do. Because if there's an infraction, along the line, there's a process for that enforcement as well. If there's infraction, it's not as if we're going to hammer you with fines and penalties straight away. The regulator is out to correct you, to give you notice of that infraction, and then give you time to correct that infraction. It is when you don't correct that infraction within that time, the regulator would now issue an enforcement order. And that enforcement order is still allowing you time to correct it. It is when you don't comply with that enforcement order that the regulator may say, okay, let me impose appropriate sanctions.
Okay, I'll come back to you shortly, but as we're waiting, I'd like you to have in mind, I mean, the issue of enforcement is fundamental, and every now and then you get comments out there that compliance is inadequate because enforcement is ineffective. Okay, so we'd like to get your perspective on that and what the authority generally is doing with regards to enforcement. In a moment, just hold that thought as I come back to you. I'd like to speak a bit about infrastructure, because really, going back to the presentation of the ACE, it covers quite a wide range of issues, including the importance of developing adequate infrastructure to ensure that there's sustainable supply of petroleum products. Now, in that regard, I'd like to ask you, Adebowale Olujimi, what do you think would be the strategy to ensure that there's adequate infrastructure and assets to ensure pipelines across the distribution network of the nation, really across the region, are wet and that they are efficient in delivering petroleum products or gas wherever they may be?
Thank you very much, Emeka, for inviting me. For an effective regulation and in terms of talking about development of infrastructure, I think the major problem here is not about the shortage of players coming in to develop infrastructures. You can see the business of the Downstream over the last probably 23 years, and the numbers of infrastructures that have been developed from depots, from pipelines, from different infrastructures to make effective distribution of petroleum products and even other liquids to the market. But I think where we're lacking in an environment where we are today is actually a strategy of the regulator and the business people seeing themselves as one, because we need to tell ourselves the truth. I would be in a way disagree with Dr. Tolorunse on the issue that no businessman wants to be regulated. I don't think that's true. For us, and I can speak here on behalf of a lot of our colleagues, we know that we work in a very systemic environment where without regulation, business owners will always want to take advantage and would actually react, which, I mean, at the end of the day, the Nigerians or the people who are on the streets or Nigerians will be the ones to suffer for it. And I mean, we have so many issues where we raise. I'll use, for example, just a very clear one. In 2010-11, at Ijebu satellite town in Lagos, I mean, a couple of companies came together and feel that, look, there are plots of lands around there, and when we knew there were shortages of distribution outlets and points, for products to be picked, of course, we went into the then DPR, and investors came, they invested, but what it took us, most of the investors around the neighborhood, to be able to get the infrastructure to running is actually more like doing the work of government. And in this kind of case, basically, is because of the lack on the sides of both parties, both the government and the business owners. Of course, the business owner would really wish to pay tax, give incentives, and employ Nigerians, employ people. But when there's a shortage of synergy together, and there's a shortage of availability of funds available to the market to be able to develop infrastructures, those are one of the key areas where we lack in a lot of things. I was going to come back here and talk about refining. And when I talk about I'll just give a very brief, what's it called, that I have experienced in recent time, in the last few months of our operation. We got a field which we're developing somewhere in the offshore in Akwa Ibom State, and our proximity to infrastructure, right, is just barely a few kilometers away. But two things here: operators and partnership within the industry and other partners which are supposed to champion businesses to succeed. We seem to be lacking in all that happening, and that's a very big issue to successes of business. For us, we have a lot of crude oil in stock, right? But bringing it to the surface and getting it to the point where refining would be able to be made easy has almost become ineffective, because the regulator, I think, has not wielded its big stick. If the regulator really sits and do what they need to do to make businesses, to make it to be the real enabler of the business, then we're there to succeed. But in this case, I mean, it's a lot of struggle, and we need to work on it, because a lot of genuine business Nigerians want to invest. They have the confidence in investing, but they're not getting the right support from both government and other institutions. Like financing, it's actually almost impossible in Nigeria at the moment. I mean, you're borrowing at almost about 30% to bring in petroleum products. And I'll talk about the recently issue of deregulation as well. You can see that a lot, like the ACE mentioned, over 250,000 tons of PMS was brought in. But somebody has not asked, how have you been able to source the FX? Everybody knows today, dollar is 1,200 naira. And by the time you open the LC, maybe in August or in September, because I know a few of my colleagues who now have the same products in their tank, unable to discharge it because now the prices have moved against them, and the market is not reacting to what it is, and government is a bit stifling us, the operators, in this. So it's a complex situation.
I'm going to come back to you on that shortly. In fact, I know that in the press, Emadeb was visible recently after the announcement of the removal of subsidies fully. So I'll come back to you on this very point shortly. But one of the things you've raised is the paucity of infrastructure to facilitate some kind of distribution. And I'd like to come to you, Mr. Ukoha, on that point now. Now, there's some kind of contradiction, if I may say. There are feelers in some places that there is an oversupply of assets, like storage, for instance. Yet, at the same time, there is large indication of suboptimal investment. Is there a need to cap? I mean, you're a regulator, and part of your regulatory functions is competition regulation. Do you think there's a need to cap the supply in the market of some types of assets?
Okay, so first, I think I would like to concede to Emadeb CEO that yes, we must all acknowledge that the infrastructure deficit actually makes the operating environment slightly more difficult. And we must also acknowledge the efforts that investors make and the costs of doing business around. However, we must also point to the optimistic picture. With Mr. President's deregulation of the PMS market, that has set us on the pathway to cost-reflective pricing. It may not be achieved automatically, but we're quite positive that working with other stakeholders, it's work in progress and we will get there. Some of the variables you've mentioned are not within a single regulatory oversight. It will require multi-agency collaboration to do that. but we all have to work together as stakeholders to optimize the output for this industry. Having said that, we're not oversupplied. This is a country of 200 plus million Nigerians. Last year, I remember that the single message I gave was forecasting what this deregulation will do in terms of competition. This year, I would like to also ride on the Authority Chief Executive's keynote address that speaks to inefficiencies and the need for us to make the right investments to drive down that. In this regard, I would like to urge most participants here to please stop by the authorities' stand, and you would be quite well informed at the end on those key areas that if the right investments are made, then we'll see the growth that we're all looking forward to. Take for instance, storage. Yes, the reduction in volume, given the regulation in PMS, has seen quite some redundancies. But when the right investments are also made in the National Strategic Stock Administration, for which the authority has written a regulation, has done the framework, and is in the process of operationalizing that, you will see that there will be stability as well in that. We expect growth in the in-country refining capacity. Section 317 of the PIA requires us to do a backward integration policy. Once that is achieved, you will see growth in modular refineries, now including PMS refining within their processes. That's non-existent now. Also, it's important to also speak to some of the infrastructure that is begging for investment. The marine operations are key. Reception facilities are one. Even the retail outlets, both the variety of products that should be in offer and what operators need to do to reduce costs is quite critical. And those inefficiencies will remain if we don't make the right investments. Talking about pipelines and all, we're doing trucking as the only means of transportation now, at a time that pipelines are universally acknowledged to be the cheapest, the cleanest way of doing that. So when the authority is quite poised to handhold any investor through the value chain and say these are the areas that investments need to be made, and this is what the outputs, the return on investments will also be. And with that, I think infrastructure-wise, we'll see growth in that.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. As we try to end this session shortly, I'd like to just start rounding off. Mostly, again, on pricing and tariff. I don't want to put you on the spot, but it seems we're in a kind of a conundrum right now. Subsidy is gone, but subsidy remains. Would you like to give any direction or suggestions at this point as to how we can move forward from where we are and get to where we want to go?
So in my experience, everyone enjoys some level of subsidy. It's not such a bad thing, it's how it is directed and how it's used. In terms of where we are, where we are because there is not, I guess it's happening now, there's not enough alignment between government policies. I feel sorry for the regulator today because the regulator is going with the laws that have been passed, all the revision of provisions and things, and then you get a government that hasn't really articulated its long-term policy. So for instance, in terms of the subsidy on PMS, it could have been phased because we haven't really practiced market price strategy. We have never implemented that. You never know what the true value of a commodity costs within a certain period. Let me give you an example. In South Africa, for instance, they are import-based. So if you kind of know how long it takes for a ship to come, and within a certain period, what it costs, what it will cost to land it. Then you do like a local understanding of where all the ports are, and then you start to say, okay, within this, say the 1st of November and the 25th of November, petrol prices will be between 100 naira and 175 naira, depending on where you are. Then you get a ban and you get more investment, you get more understanding. Really, it's just a market-based price strategy, really, just to see. And then you give subsidies where they are. I believe that the government needs a lot of revenue, and I don't think, for instance, removing the VAT on diesel is as effective as removing the VAT on LPG, which has been a substitute for kerosene that you took subsidies off a while ago. So those are the kind of things that I think, and regulation, we can knock them here, but they have a difficult job. But they need to do better as well. They need to ensure there's a lot more stakeholder engagement, because there are a lot of things that are passed I just overlooked because somebody who seems to be doing well is saying this is what we used to do, but the truth is that he's operating at a certain level, and there are many entrants there suffering. There's a lack of training as well in terms of how people approach businesses, and that's not just for the oil industry, for everyone that comes into play. So in terms of pricing, they're just, it's just stakeholder. It's simple: stakeholder management, market-based pricing, and then maybe you start to give subsidies where you think the balance goes, because cross subsidies can create a disaster, which I think potentially we can get there if we're not careful. But maybe, as the special advisor to the president says today, maybe they start to articulate the downstream strategy, and the regulation becomes much more capable of implementing, supporting and growing its oversight functions, and encouraging. Just to touch on infrastructure, I actually agree with him. I think that the regulatory authorities need to sort of nudge, maybe not wield the stick, nudge participants into collaboration work, which then comes to the fact that they're not enough assets, but they just how they're effectively used. The regulatory authorities also need to nudge people along. For instance, there's some areas where, when the strategic storage comes into play and all that, you can just tell people in that area, we're only going to push these sort of quality material here, and that sort of encourages them. Sorry, I took you away from pricing, but
no problem. Therefore, I'll come to you finally. I'll come last to you, and what I want you to speak to within the context of enforcement is the role of peer review. Okay? So just have a thought on that. I'll come to you on that shortly. But before that, Dr. Tolorenshe, we asked a question on enforcement by the authority. He would not want you to wield a big stick. He'll want you to nudge them. But enforcement is absolutely necessary, isn't it?
Yeah, truly, enforcement is very, very necessary. Very, very necessary. Although sometimes we use carrot and stick approach, to get things done. And that was what I said earlier on, that in enforcing infractions or regulations, the regulator will not just slam penalty or slam fines on you straight away. There are processes we take. We issue you notice of infraction. We expect you to comply within a specified period. And if you don't comply within that period, it is then we now issue enforcement order. After that, we move forward to, if nothing is wrong, we move forward to issue appropriate penalty. And adequate provisions even in the law, PIA for example, that says that, if you feel that the regulator have slammed you too much penalty, or it's not comply with the provisions of the law, you can actually go to court to have it tested. Similarly, if the regulator feels that, you are not complying, even with the enforcement order, the fines have imposed on you, you can also initiate prosecution or initiate civil action against you. So, like I said the other time, which my able brother there disagreed that no businessman wants to be regulated. Actually, that is not what I mean. From my experience in the industry, I see a kind of reluctance and apathy to conforming to regulations, unless you keep on hammering on them. That's what I mean. Not a blatant refusal. That's not what I mean. But I can see the reluctance. But however, the regulator also recognizes its position as a business enabler. And that is very key, because we don't want to regulate you out of business. If we regulate you out of business, we will not be in business as well. So, to answer your question, sir, regulation, there should be a balance between enforcement and then compliance. Working as a collaborator, that doesn't mean that we are only out to slam you with penalty. We are also out to collaborate with you to ensure that you comply. In fact, we'll be glad where the industry gravitate towards self-enforcement, self-regulation kind of thing, so that the roles of the regulator will only be limited to oversight and ensure monitoring and inspection and all that. If industry can set up its own standard, set up its own regulatory framework, and then be transparent and accountable, in this kind of thing, the regulator will be happy. Somebody said one time, that the cost of policing will be more if everybody decides to violate the law. But the cost will be reduced if we comply. And that is how regulation should take place.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think those are very valid points. And in closing, I think we'll close with you, Solijimi. Peer review. From what he said and what he indicated earlier, peer review is absolutely important, isn't it? And are there any structures in place among industry operators to self-regulate? Just close on that.
Well, it's actually very important. Without a peer review and both the business people and the regulator coming together, we can't forge ahead with a sustainable economy, a sustainable business front, and a sustainable country. So, where we lack a lot of peer review mechanism here is the fact that the collaboration between the regulators and the businesses sometimes, there seems to be, because sometimes for example, and I just without taking what Musti mentioned the other time, you can see the issue of VAT on gas oil, VAT on LPG. I think it's more than so due that government needs to know, because LPG came to replace kerosene. And here, there was a time, maybe about last 2 years ago, we witnessed what happened with the Ministry of Finance and Customs telling importers to come and pay backlogs of big fines, on issues around VAT and co and FR. So these are things that a business owner who has invested a lot of money, who probably at the time, and he has some level of exposure and what he needs to give back to his investors. But when government now comes with fines, then it makes the business environment not habitable. And that's why we need a lot together in terms of partnership and peer review. And it's very essential that without a proper peer review and the regulator taking back issues of sustainability of the business back to his own government or back to his own people, then we cannot have a sustainable economy. And that's where it's very critical that to regulate is a matter of collaboration. Somebody coming to invest his or her money must be ready to, in every way, make profit. And at the end of the day, let the collaboration and peer review between government and businesses succeed. And that's the only way forward.
Thank you very much. I think we've had a very wonderful engagement by these gentlemen. Essentially, at the end of the day, what I think is being said is, from the private sector point of view, yes, we're ready to comply, but we need government to be consistent with its policy and approach. And what I hear the government saying is, we will use a carrot and stick approach. We'll give you the carrot. Where you fail to take the carrot, we use the stick. And if you're not happy with our use of the stick, you can go to court. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for a very engaging session. And I think at this, I just want to say thank you to the panelists who have been very, very good. Adebowale Olujimi is the Group Managing Director of MADEP Energy Resources. A round of applause for him, please. Mustafa Fashinro is Managing Director, Founder, a Partner at Line Trail Trading. A round of applause for him, please. Obugo Koha is Executive Director, Distribution, Retail, it's just a very long mouthful, at Nigerian Midstream and Downstream Petroleum Regulatory Authority. A round of applause for him, please. And Dr. Joseph Toloronshaw is a legal advisor, NMBPRA. We can take two questions.
So we have one here, and we have one here, and a third, please. All right, thank you.
Okay, three questions. We'll take all questions together.
First. My name is Francis Ogari. I'm the Executive Director of Hydrocarbon Processing Plants, Installation and Transportation Infrastructure of the NMDPRA. First of all, I want to make it very clear. Regulations do not just come from the wind. We had a very strong interactive section with the stakeholders, and I want to make that very clear. Everybody had an input. The peer review and all those things were all done by the authority and the stakeholders. So if that was missed, that's very unfortunate. So it wasn't meant to be a kind of stopping the show from you going on. So what we expect right now is more like a feedback while the regulation is in operation. That's what we should do. So I'm particularly listening to you about the problems you have with your wells and the refinery projects you have. First and foremost, what the authority does when you have projects, when you write to us, is to subject you to a peer review, which is more like a permit and concept workshop. In all the things I've received on my table, none of them have been lacking. We have tried to urge you on, try to help you in those rough areas to round it up for you. And a lot of people will attest to that they got their modular refinery easier than they have ever thought of. A lot of license, the lawyer, Tolonshe, the ED will attest to that. There is no issue at all in enabling your business. But you also know that the regulations are there, and that's what the permit and concept brings to light. Refocuses you if you look above what you should do. So, you're welcome when you get to our stand. A lot of things will be made clear to you, but we are here not as an enforcer. And as the lawyer said, when you take your eyes off the ball, we have a way of cautioning you, which is writing to you about non-compliance. And that non-compliance does not come with the enforcement of penalty. It's after we called you for sessions and tell you, we gave this to you when we were doing the permit and concept. Why are you not doing it? And again, for your refinery, it's simple. You have the vision to have a refinery tied back. If I listen to the PAMSEC very well, yours is even very simple. You have the resort somewhere. All you're trying to do is to evacuate it. There are two modes of evacuation. Either you use a pipeline because it's a swampy area, or use your barging. Both are within the context of two regulations or regulatory agencies, the NUPRC, the NMDPRA. The permit and concept tells you who to go to for which is an enabler. And when you're done, you come to us with your conceptual engineering after going through the P&C review. And that one guides you. The things I see here is because people don't ask, they don't know. And I don't want to leave here carrying the perception we are showstoppers. We are not showstoppers. We are show enablers.
Okay.
So, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. One other question.
There were two hands up here,
Okay.
and the gentleman. Yes, please pass, and then we'll come to the front.
Thank you very
Please.
much. I want to make an observation. I want to advise that going forward, the Petroleum Tanker Drivers Union should be ably represented here. I'm surprised that the chairman is not here because he's also a stakeholder. Because actually my question would have been directed to him, but I know we have some people who are experts in the downstream sector of the oil industry. Maybe you can also give us your perspective about this question. Now, we are not oblivious of the fact that the price per liter of PMS went up geometrically with the advent of deregulation. You also agree with me that the value chain is incomplete if products are not successfully delivered to the retail outlets. Now, the movement of these products from the source depots to the retail outlets is bedeviled by the kind of humongous shortages that oil dealers are experiencing from the truck drivers in the retail outlets. In your view as an expert, can you advise the House on how this problem can be salvaged? Because we know that up till this moment, the controversy between oil aging and tank dip in the retail outlet is still unsolved. Please, can you give us your perspective on this issue? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Final question from the gentleman in front.
Thank you very much. My name is Barrister Okegwe. I am Executive Director for Mainland Oil and Gas. First of all, let me appreciate the panel for a very robust and engaging session. But more importantly, I want to appreciate the authority chief, simply because he's someone I have a lot of respect for, and he's been around. So I put a lot of weight in the presentation. Now he's highlighted something during his presentation which borders on CNG. He's let us know that the government is making a lot of investment in that area. And it's a no-brainer that CNG is the way of the future, simply because it is significantly cheaper and it is cleaner. And that, of course, dovetails into all the other economic and environmental issues that he raised during his presentation. Now, my question is specifically for him. I would like him to answer it since he's here. The question I have is that, from our standpoint, the problem we have CNG, there are a slew of investors out there with money, and they want to come into the CNG field. But what we do lack sometimes is policy clarity. And let me paint a very graphic picture. When the United States government wanted to, or when they realized that electric vehicles was the way of the future, they did one thing, because from the standpoint of a market player and an investor, once you have policy clarity, then you can deploy your money. And so what did the Biden administration do? What they did was to guarantee, and they started doing it immediately, which was to build electric charging ports in all US major highways. And so for my chief, the question I have, and I am glad that he's also a member of the presidential panel on CNG, what we need to know is what are the concrete steps that the government, things that we can see. Because I think The exact opposite of policy clarity is that you have uncertainty. And when you have uncertainty in the market, then you're going to have volatility. There is no doubt in my mind that CNG will solve a lot of our problems. But what are the concrete things that we can see in the next couple of years to assure us that government is really invested in the CNG project? That way we can begin to deploy our investments. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. The ACE is not on the panel, but he'll have opportunity to respond to that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and my brother, Mr. Igwe. Yes, the government is taking the CNG revolution seriously. And Mr. President has set up, like you said, a steering committee to guide the process of rolling out CNG infrastructure and availability across the nation. On the one hand, like I mentioned also in my address, we have what we call the Decade of Gas. And the Decade of Gas is also like a program put in place that will leash out midstream opportunities, especially gas, rolling out of gas availability, infrastructure, and transportation utilization all across in the next 10 years, which was from 2021 to 2030. The steering committee of that, also, of which I'm a member, is working tirelessly alongside all the operators, whether it's Shell, Chevron, ExxonMobil, and others, in terms of the asset and switching of the asset to produce gas for the nation, for national utilization. So, CNG, coming back to it, yes, the government has put in place some mechanism. And in fact, we are working closely with some of the key stakeholders to put in processes of conversion. Government in the interim, and in line with the commitment to the trade unions, bringing in buses, converting those buses into CNG. Now we have some locations, not all over the country, because transporting it to those locations will be difficult, but some key areas that would be easier to move the products in order to have the station for refilling plants. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, at NNDPRA, we have a director called MGDIF, which is Gas Infrastructure Fund, which is there to support business enablers, or in terms of collaborating with other investors to invest in this infrastructure of mid and downstream, particularly in the midstream. So if you are interested in investing in that area, you're always welcome. Now the policy, like you said, yes, we are putting policies in place, and we're also collaborating and engaging with all the stakeholders. So be very happy also to have your input so that we can make it easy for you, because we're enablers of business. So we're looking at all avenues necessary or available in order to make it easy for us to roll into that business. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Ace, for that clarity which you've given. Just a further comment, I think the next session after this, after the opening of the exhibition, is focused on gas, and a lot more clarity probably will also come that direction.
Yes, I wasn't so clear about the spirit of the essence of the question itself, but let me just attempt to explain what I understand he was saying. On Wednesday, by the way, the authority will be meeting with stakeholders around trucking here in Lagos on the sidelines of this, because there are a number of issues, particularly stranded trucks that are laden with products, which is on the increase, and never minding the risk potentials whilst in transit. And it's something we want to deal with as we enter into the peak travel period. With the regulation, a number of issues are being posed as well on trucking. There's excess capacity, as you already know. There's the need to, the high cost as well, for truckers to begin to think about alternative powering of the truck itself, whether they want to continue on AGO and have a high costed efficiency, or to come down on CNG, as the Authority Chief Executive has said. So there are numerous issues there, and we're looking forward to addressing those as we progress.
So thank you very much, ladies, gentlemen, for your time this afternoon, and thank you very much for the questions from the audience. I think we're done now.
Yes, we are. Please appreciate this panel. and appreciate Dr. Emeka Akabogu for steering it very effectively. Would ask you to please stand right here at the OTL sign for the next photo.